What's up, everybody? It's Corey, host of the Grease Pole Podcast. It's that time of week. As it stands right now, only undefeated team in the league. Fly, Eagles, fly, okay? So we're 4 weeks in. This is week 4 of the performance tiers. And it was an interesting week, okay? So before we get into the tiers, if you want to understand why we named the tiers what they did, click this link above my finger, and that link will take you to the initiation of the tier video. So let's get things started. And you know where we begin every week with the Brian Dawkins tier, right? And first and foremost, offensive side of the ball, Miles Sanders. And you know we love him here on the pod. He had a career high of 134 yards rushing on 27 carries. He averaged 5 yards a carry, 2 rushing touchdowns on the day as well. And the way it played out, it was interesting because Jordan Mailata and Isaac Seumalo both left the game with injuries. Jack Driscoll and Sua Opeta step in. And Sanders still managed to be effective between the tackles. So it's funny because Jalen Hurts has been on fire the past 2 weeks, but he came back down to earth this past week against Jacksonville. And, you know, weather was a factor, but I've always believed that Sanders is a guy that can be a difference maker. All he needs is the opportunity. And you saw that on Sunday with those 27 carries. And the Birds don't stay undefeated against Doug Pederson's Jaguars without Miles Sanders. Point blank. Let's give out a Dawkins tier, or initiate someone to the Dawkins tier over on the defensive side of the ball. You already know who it's going to be, Haason Reddick. And the defense as a whole had 5 takeaways on the day. The defense has stayed incredibly hot. If you've got the Birds defense and special teams, V does, mazel tov to you. They've been killing it and putting up numbers. 5 takeaways on the day for the unit as a whole, with Reddick accounting for 2 strip sacks, including the one that put the game on ice. And this is what we've been saying, and what just about every Eagles fan's been screaming at Jonathan Gannon. Let this dude rush a quarterback. That's why you brought him in. Stop dropping him into coverage. You let Haason Reddick get after the quarterback. This is what happens. He put this one away, wrapped a bow on it. Team stays 4-0 undefeated on the year. So, you know, Temple guy, Philly you love seeing Haason Reddick have a big game in Midnight Green. So that closes out the Dawkins tier for this week, which means we move down to the Chris Long tier, where James Bradbury makes an appearance. And he's been one of the Birds' most consistent players so far this season, low-key. He came up with a huge interception to Trevor Lawrence right as it looked like the Jags were starting to kind of regain momentum, maybe. And the secondary was down 2 starters. Avonte Maddox was inactive. Darius Slay was out by that point, and Bradbury read Lawrence beautifully on this play to intercept the ball. So completely swung back in the Birds' favor. And TJ Edwards as well in the Chris Long tier. And stat line wise, 6 tackles and a sack. Edwards has been very good. He, you've seen him make some open stops there, rather some stops in the open field, And it was the 2nd consecutive week that he's made an appearance in the sack column as well. The linebacking core, this isn't a revelation, has been a glaring weakness on this team for years. And it's been nice to see Edwards come into his own as a consistent contributor in the middle of this defense. Nelson Aguilar tier. And I hate to do this to our guy, but Coach Sirianni. All right? If you're the head coach, situational decision making. Early in the game, down 14-0. He opted to go for it on a 4th and short from his own roughly 40-yard line. And you love to see Sirianni trust his offense to pick up the first down and to trust his defense to stop Jacksonville should the offense come up short, which is exactly what happened. And they ended up handing Jacksonville pretty nice field position. Final minutes of the 4th quarter, up 29-21 on Jacksonville's 21-yard line. The Birds faced a 4th and short. And Jake Elliott, who had an injury scare, we'll call it. He had returned to the game by that point. And rather than attempt a roughly 38-yard field goal to make it a 2-score game, Sirianni opted to go for it and once again came up short. Now, the following play was the Haason Reddick strip sack to put an end to this thing, but it all worked out in the end. And again, Sirianni's our guy, and I love his unwavering belief in this team, but it's those little decisions that could end up being the difference between advancing and going home in the playoffs. So it's one thing now, week 4 against Jacksonville. It's another thing when January rolls around. Those things can cost you big time. speaking of costing big time, the cheeks of the cheeks, the Chip Kelly tier, and I'm putting injuries here, and I know that's more of a concept, but the Birds have managed to stay relatively healthy so far, and Sunday was kind of a difficult hand to be dealt. Darius Slay, Jordan Mailata, Devontae Smith, Isaac Seumalo, and as we referenced, even Jake Elliott had injury situations throughout the game. Now, Smith and Elliott would return to the game, but Slay missed the remainder with a forearm injury, while Jordan Mailata was out with a shoulder. And the backups were respectable, okay, which speaks to the depth of this roster. Driscoll and Opeta held it down along the offensive line, keeping Miles Sanders moving. Zach McPherson was solid, but you don't like to see games like this where dudes seem to be dropping like flies. You just don't. And that's one of those things you don't want to become a war of attrition. The roster remaining as healthy as possible is so crucial, especially as you kind of start getting into around Thanksgiving in December. We're a ways away now, but it's coming up quickly. And think about this as well. The NFC clearly is the inferior conference, right? The AFC is fucking loaded. But the NFC might even be weaker than we originally thought. Think about this. Tampa doesn't feel at all like the powerhouse they have the last 2 years. Brady seems to be almost kind of distracted, right? Green Bay, they've looked incredibly average outside of beating Chicago, which Aaron Rodgers always owns Chicago. But aside from that game, the lack of weapons at Rodgers' disposal is catching up to the Packers. Then you got the defending champion LA Rams, who haven't been nearly the same team. Stafford struggled. Allen Robinson, who they brought in, has been basically irrelevant. So at 4-0, barring a complete disaster, you can book a seat at the table in the playoffs. If the Birds are going to make a run this year, not only is it important for Jalen Hurts to continue to progress, but the more and more healthy this team is, obviously the better the odds are to make a deep run at this thing. So, look, aside from Minnesota, Jacksonville's probably the best team that the Eagles have faced in the first month of the season. You can say what you want, but it's not college. Teams don't make their own schedule. So it's also the real first test they've had as a team, and they responded. And you love to see that resiliency there, that it isn't just that they're only comfortable and capable of playing from ahead. So it'll be interesting to head out to Arizona next week and, shout out Zach Ertz, former tight end, who we're going to be playing now. And it's weird, there's like this stretch of former Eagles that we're going against in these last handful of weeks. So Zach Ertz is up next, and it'll be interesting. I'm not huge on Arizona. I'm not a big Kyler Murray guy, but these West Coast games have been historically tough for the Birds. Okay, you're going to the West Coast time zone, so you don't know what you're going to get. It's a completely different element. The team hasn't gone to the West Coast yet this year, so it's all brand new. And just saying, we're looking 5-0 in the face. So it would be great to be able to come away with a win against Arizona, but this isn't going to be easy. All right, time zones come into play, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it next Sunday, 4:25. What do you think of this past week's game against Jacksonville? What were your thoughts? Let us know who you think should be in what tier, and let us know your thoughts on the idea. The pod's growing, the page is growing. If you have ideas, we've got more coming your way. Let us know what you'd like to see. Hit the subscribe button if you would like. Either way, if not, thank you for stopping by. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week, and we'll see you on Monday for the full pod episode. As always, go Birds.